Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our masterclass today. My name is Christina Fox. I'm the CEO here at TechAlliance. And excuse me, before we get started, we have a deep sense of gratitude and respect for this land, waters, and resources protected by Indigenous peoples for centuries. And I would like to acknowledge that where I am standing is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, and the Attawandaron. Honoring all the people of Turtle Island, TechAlliance remains committed to working alongside all allies and Indigenous-led businesses to advance prosperity for the region's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And I invite you to join me in learning and unlearning the ways of colonial citizens in a quest for a better Canada. TechAlliance empowers world-class ventures and fuels growth in Canada's innovation economy. And last year, London earned several recognitions, including being on Startup Blink's 2025 Global Startup Ecosystem Index. This vibrant, thriving technology community powered by you climbed 165 spots globally and now ranks 12th in Canada, according to Startup Blink. And in CBRE's Scoring Tech Talent Report 2025, London made a bold leap from emerging tech markets in North America now to ranking number 4 on North America's next 25 markets, boasting the fastest tech sector growth rate on the continent at over 54% in just 3 years. So clearly, this global recognition reflects massive momentum in London, driven by ambitious founders, visionary industry leaders, and collaborative public and private partnerships and sustained support from champions. So as the podium of record for technology and with you in mind, we continue to advocate for policy that supports innovation and growth. But recognition alone doesn't build companies, support systems do. And that's where TechAlliance comes in, and it's our pleasure to be hosting this masterclass today. And just for your comfort, before we get the masterclass started with our guest speaker, you'll know that all participant microphones are muted, so please just relax and enjoy. Our masterclass is going to be recorded and available for replay when you need to come back to the details, and it will be available for you on YouTube. And I encourage you to drop any questions that you have in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and to add any comments in our active chat feature. I'll be keeping an eye on those Q&As, and we'll be supporting David during the Q&A session. So we know that intellectual property is a strategic asset that shapes investor confidence and fuels long-term growth. It's something that we're deeply aware of here at TechAlliance and do an awful lot of coaching around. In this particular masterclass, our keynote is going to explore how entrepreneurs, particularly those building in food innovation and agri-tech, can align key IP actions like patents and protecting unique food formulations with their commercialization plans to attract investment, outperform competitors, and scale resilient agri-food innovations. Leading our learning today is David Morrison, the principal at Smart Biggar. David's practice is principally directed towards preparation and prosecution of patent applications worldwide in the biotechnology, biomedical, chemical, mechanical, oil and gas, and agricultural areas. A teacher of a graduate level course on intellectual property, David also provides clients with patent validity and infringement assessments and opinions, and occasionally drafts and reviews licensing agreements. But prior to his career in law, David worked as a fellow in an academic research institute in a technology transfer and commercialization in a university setting. So he's very close to what happens when novel innovation is commercialized and how it has a defensible moat with IP and tangible assets. So that's my introduction of David, and I'm going to now shift it over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Christina. I'm just going to wait for I think my camera's going to come on here in a second. Start video. Hopefully everybody can see me okay. Thanks again, Christina. I'm perfect. Thanks for that great introduction, and thanks for having me today. I always enjoy talking about intellectual property, and I'm happy to share some thoughts and insights on protecting intellectual property generally, and particularly for startups and scaling companies in the food and agri-tech sectors. I just thought I'd share a little bit more about me, although Christina did a great job introducing me. I have a Bachelor of Engineering in Chemical Engineering and Bioengineering from McMaster University. I have a Biomedical Engineering Master's degree also from McMaster, and I attended Western University for law school. I'm a licensed lawyer in Ontario, and I'm a licensed patent agent in both Canada and the United States. And again, my firm is Smart Biggar. We're Canada's largest IP law firm. We have about 200 professionals, including patent agents, trademark agents, and lawyers. We have 6 offices, Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Waterloo, Vancouver, and Calgary. And we are experts in all areas of technology. We have experts in all areas of technology, so we can successfully help all sorts of companies from smart startups and scale-ups to multinational firms with their IP needs. So today we're going to talk a little bit about intellectual property, and particularly through a lens of a startup company or a scaling company in the food or agri-tech sectors. But a lot of what I'm going to say today is general as well. So if you're not related in those sectors, it'll still be very, very applicable. I'm going to start with talking a little bit about what the importance of IP is, and sharing some statistics about IP. Then we're going to talk about the different types of IP, so patents and trademarks, copyright, industrial designs, and trade secrets. We're going to highlight some IP risks that are common, particularly for small and medium-sized companies. And then I'm going to share some strategies, some for startups and for food and agri-tech startups particularly. And then the last slide, I'm going to share some information about government funding options, because that's a hot button topic these days in both the provincial government and our federal government. We'll start with, why is IP important? Well, IP is an asset. It could be a registered asset, it could be a non-registered asset, but in either instance, IP is an asset, and it's becoming a primary asset in companies in the last 20 to 30 years. And because it's such a valuable asset, and because it makes up the valuation of so many companies, we need to strategize about how to build that asset, how to nurture that asset, and how to get as much value out of that asset as possible. So we strategize, we build IP strategies that align with business strategies of your company, and that way we can protect the competitive advantages that a company has. And we'll flesh that out and dig into it a little bit as we go through the presentation. So IP rights can be used for protection, right? Generally, they can be used to stop others from doing something, right? Whether it's a patent and you're stopping somebody else from making, using, or selling your invention, or in a trademark setting, you're stopping somebody else from manufacturing or selling goods or services that are confusingly similar to those that you have either registered or that you're using, right? But there's a lot of different other uses for intellectual property particularly that are growing. For instance, IP can be used for marketing, right? Innovative companies are generally well viewed by the general public, so you can use IP to promote your own reputation of innovation of your business. We found that SMEs that hold formal IP are 3 times more likely to engage in product innovation than those without IP. So if you've got a formal registered IP, something like a registered patent application or a registered trademark, you're much more likely to be viewed as an innovative company. And because of that, SMEs that hold formal IP are 64% more likely to be high growth companies. And businesses using IP in patent-intensive industries, which food tech and agri-tech would be considered patent-intensive industries, have about 8 to 10 times more revenues than those that do not use IP. So IP, if you're building a company in this day and age, intellectual property is of critical importance, and something that you need to be aware of at an early stage, and then develop a strategy so that you can maximize the value of your business by maximizing the value of your IP. I will quickly walk through some different types of IP, just so everybody kind of has a baseline and a general understanding of what the different types are. Generally, we think of it as being about 5 different buckets of intellectual property protection. We have patents that protect inventions. We have trademarks that can be used to protect brands, designs that can be used to protect aesthetics. And these designs can be, there can be different terminology for these designs. In Canada, we call them industrial designs. In the United States, we call them design patents. So they kind of all fit into the way to protect the way something looks. We use copyright to protect creations, and we use trade secrets to protect know-how and other valuable information. So if we just take a look at one example where kind of all these different types of IP come into play, is we'll look very quickly at Coca-Cola, right? So in Coca-Cola, clearly everybody's familiar with the logos that are protected by trademarks. So that would be both the name Coca-Cola by itself, as well as the logo of the Coca-Cola in that stylized font. Have patent for the dispensing nozzle or the bottle itself. That could be subject to patent protection if it's a new and inventive bottle. We have the recipe. So the Coca-Cola recipe is one of the most famously protected trade secrets. So it's a confidential information that's maintained by the company. We have advertising and media protection. So all of the commercials you see, all of the print media that you see, that's all protected by copyright protection. And finally, the shape of the bottle itself is a very famous industrial design or design patent of Coca-Cola. So that shape of the bottle that's on the screen there can be protected by industrial design. Looking a little bit more closely at each of these technologies, it's important to understand at kind of at what stage of the life cycle of your company you're likely to start thinking about and start protecting different aspects of your business using these different types of intellectual property. So if we think about it, trade secrets is usually a very important consideration for businesses from a very, very early stage all the way to the development and commercialization and of their product and the development of their brand as the company grows. So trade secrets at the very beginning, if you're developing a new product, you want to keep that new product a secret. You don't want to tell anyone about it at a very, very early stage. You want to lock down that information and ensure people understand that some aspects of your business are confidential. Once you've you've started developing your prototype, maybe you have a prototype, you've got something that's working, and you're starting to think that you might have something that's worth protecting. That's where patents and designs generally come into play. We'll talk about this in a couple of slides, but I think one of the key takeaways from today and all intellectual property talks that you probably hear of are that it's always best to file a patent application before any public disclosure of the invention. And so at that stage, because of that factor, generally patents and designs are of what I'll say more importance, or they're on the top of the minds of entrepreneurs and small and medium sized companies at an earlier stage than say trademarks or copyright, because you want, before you go out and start discussing your invention, you want to make sure you file a patent application beforehand. Trademarks and copyright, usually something that come a little bit later, maybe as you start to develop the brand of your company and or the development of the brand of your product. That's when trademarks come into play. Trademarks, one reason trademarks and copyright are a little bit later in the life cycle of a business, so because you can obtain protection for both without registering the right. And we'll talk about that later, but there are unregistered rights that are associated with trademarks and copyright. Digging in a little bit more into a patent, what exactly is a patent? Well, a patent is something that protects the functionality of your invention, okay? And a patent, when it's been granted, grants the patent holder a 20-year monopoly. Okay, so you can stop somebody else from making, using, selling, or importing whatever the patented invention is. And the patented invention, we don't need to dig into the details too much, but generally, the patented invention is defined by a specific portion of the patent, and it's called the claims. Generally, the claims are at the very end of a patent document. So if you're ever looking at a patent document and you want to understand exactly what it is, what exactly monopoly has been granted to the patent holder, you look to the claims. Okay. Now the granting of a monopoly is not without consequence, right? And patents we think of as a bargain. They're a bargain between the government that's granting the patent and the patentee or the applicant, the person who is receiving the patent. And the bargain between the two is the government will grant this monopoly of making, using, and selling the patented invention in exchange for public disclosure. Okay, so every patent application and every granted patent is published. We can search those documents using public databases, but every application is published 18 months after it is initially filed at a patent office. And that's something that's very important to understand. We'll talk a little bit later about the competing interests of maintaining a trade secret and filing a patent application and how that kind of fits into the food tech and agri-tech space. But it's important for everyone to understand that if you file a patent application, your invention is going to be publicly disclosed. And you need to keep in mind that the level of detail that is required for you to include in that patent application is a sufficient level so that somebody could read the document and make and use the invention. Okay, so that's the patent bargain. The last point I'll make with patents is patents must be registered in each country where protection is desired. So if you want to manufacture, well, if you want to stop others from making, using, and selling your product in Canada, you need to file in Canada. If you want to do that in the United States, you need to file a patent application in the United States. If you want to do that in Europe, you need to file a patent application. Initially, you file it at the European Patent Office. Then after a patent has been granted, then you still need to choose individual countries in Europe where the patent will be validated. So it's a very jurisdiction-specific process in order to get patent protection. Something patentable? Well, there's generally 4 requirements in order to be granted a patent. Your invention must be new, it must be non-obvious or inventive. That's like another word for the same requirement. Your invention must be useful, and your invention must be patentable subject matter. Kind of going quickly in reverse order. Patentable subject matter, that's generally a low threshold. There are some subject matters in some jurisdictions that are statutorily not patentable. We used to have some struggles when software was first being the subject of patent applications about whether software was patentable subject matter. We have good guidance from patent offices about how to patent software now, so we know that software is patentable subject matter. But patentable subject matter is kind of the first requirement. Usefulness is a very low threshold. If your invention does something useful, if it has some utility, then it meets that threshold, that meets that requirement. So the big 2 that we spend most of our time negotiating with patent offices are whether the invention is new and whether it's non-obvious. And whether something is new is whether or not the exact invention you have claimed to have invented, is that been publicly disclosed prior to the filing date of your patent application? And if the entire invention has not been publicly disclosed in a single publication, then your invention is new. And if it has not been publicly disclosed in a prior publication, can you combine 2 existing publications and without any degree of inventiveness arrive at the invention that you have claimed to be new? And that's a very, very subjective test, but non-obviousness is generally where we spend most of our time negotiating with patent offices about whether or not it would be obvious to arrive at a solution in view of two different separate pieces of prior art. Okay, and again, I'll keep saying it. Before filing, confidentiality is key. It's not impossible to get a patent if you've publicly disclosed it prior to filing a patent application, but it's much more difficult. So we always recommend that you file a patent application prior to any public disclosure. Industrial designs, I mentioned at the beginning, they're used to protect the way that something looks, right? So in the example that I gave earlier would be in the shape of the Coca-Cola bottle. Here I've included some pictures of Crocs. The industrial design or design patent is directed to the features of the shape, the configuration, the pattern, or the ornamentation of an article. So simply the way that it looks. Design patents cannot be used to protect functional aspects of the design. So generally speaking, design patents or industrial designs are viewed as being having a smaller scope of protection than an industrial or than a utility patent, or what I'll call patents that I've been calling up to this point in the presentation. Because if you change the way the thing looks, then you can avoid infringing the design patent. Okay, design patents are up to 15 years in term. I'm not sure I mentioned it I think I mentioned it earlier, but utility patents are 20 years. You get 20 years of protection from the date that it was filed. So they're a little bit different. Here's a couple other examples of design patents, things that you can see. So we have an HVAC control device, so a thermostat. Also, we've been getting a lot more design registrations on the look of a user interface. So if you have a unique user interface, then you may be able to protect the way that it looks. Here you can see it's obviously the Apple user interface with the slide to power off feature and the cancel indicator at the bottom of the screen. So you can protect the way that looks, but again, you can't stop somebody else from using this registration from having a feature on its software of sliding to turn off the device. Okay. And again, industrial designs are like patents in that they give the holder the exclusive right in a specific country for a specific period of time to exclude others from making, importing, selling, and designs as well, renting any article to which the design or a design not differing substantially therefrom has been applied. Okay, so those are kind of industrial designs or design patents. Copyright. So copyright is the exclusive right to produce or reproduce a work. Okay, and what is a work? Well, a work is something that is expressed, fixed, and original, and can include literary works, so a book or a poem, artistic works, so a painting, musical works, a song or an album, and dramatic works, so a dramatic performance, for example. Those are all different types of works that are expressed and fixed. And as soon as the work is fixed or expressed, copyright protection arises in the work. Okay. You do not have to register your copyright, your work, in order for there to be protection. Okay. Simply by creating the work, you can stop others from producing or reproducing that work. Okay. Some tips, just a general tip is if you believe that you have created a new work, you can include the C logo with a circle around it to let others know that you're asserting copyright protection in that. That can include a website, that can include code, manuals that you can create, anything like that. You can mark with a C. And there's just a little quick note here about open source software. Obviously, software code as it's written is protectable by copyright. You need to understand that open source software is also protected by copyright, and generally it's subject to license terms in order to use open source software. So you should keep track of software that's open source and understand what licenses you're being exposed to by using it. Just quickly with respect to computers, if you think about hardware, generally they're protected with industrial design protection or patents. Software can be protected in many different ways, right? We can patent software. I mentioned that earlier. Simply writing code can be protected by copyright protection. The downside to copyright being used to protect software, and I'll move over to this slide, is that others can write a different code that performs the same function, right? So if they don't write the code word for word the same as your code, you can't stop them from doing that using copyright. But if they write code that performs the same function and that function is protected by a patent, then you could stop them from using their software that's performing the same function. Okay, so that's kind of the discrepancy between relying on software or copyright protection for software and patenting software. There are other issues with patenting software, and I won't dwell on this for too much, but again, it comes back to this idea of, could the software be better protected by using just trade secret protection as opposed to patent protection? If your software is running on a back-end server and maybe isn't seen by users, and you can keep it a secret by running it on a back-end server, is it better protected by trade secret protection, where nobody really knows what, for example, the algorithm is doing or how the algorithm is operating, as opposed to patent protection, where that's going to be published? Okay. Trade secrets, again, what are trade secrets? Trade secrets are any valuable business information that derives value from the secrecy. Okay, that's important to take away. So it could be code that's been written as software. It could be client information of potential business targets. It could be know-how and how to use the device that you've invented. That's not really related to the structure of the device itself. It's just the know-how and how to use it. That could be trade secret information. I said earlier, trade secrets are generally used at an early stage of development of a business. They may be the only practical choice during early stage of development. And trade secrets are protected as long as information is kept secret, right? So if you can keep something a secret, you can maintain it as confidential information through way of contract, right? You can ask employees to have employee agreements with confidentiality clauses, letting it known that if they release the information, then they will be in breach of their contract. That's generally how trade secrets are enforced. Okay. Some examples of famous trade secrets: the KFC recipe, the Coca-Cola recipe I mentioned earlier. The Dr. Pepper recipe was a trade secret. The WD-40 recipe was a trade secret. We see trade secret protection in recipes a lot because the the thing that the recipe creates, it's difficult to reverse engineer exactly what the recipe is. So they lend themselves to trade secret protection. Some of the risks of trade secrets are they're vulnerable to public disclosure, right? Once a trade secret becomes public information, it's no longer a trade secret, and you're not able to stop others from copying what it is that the trade secret was protecting. Okay, so if it's in something that's easily reverse engineered, then trade secret protection may not be the best protection, IP protection to use. The other thing about trade secrets is an owner must take steps to protect the confidentiality of the information. Okay, if you don't let people know internally, so that's, for example, employees, that the information is confidential, then it's not, if the information gets out, you don't have any recourse against the people that disclose the confidential information. Okay. So a lot of times when considering whether or not to maintain something as a trade secret or file a patent application. We think about things like how practical is it to keep this a secret, and what's the business value if we do file a patent application. Okay. Takes us to trademarks. Trademarks are marks, which can be a combinations of letters or words. The mark could be a slogan, it could be a logo, it could be a color or a sound. Any one of these marks that you use to distinguish your goods and services from the goods and services of others. Okay, that's what a trademark is. And a trademark is used to protect the goodwill associated with your goods and services. Here's a couple of examples of ways that different companies can use the same word, but in different ways. Because here, with the example being Bounty, a Bounty chocolate bar and Bounty paper towels are different goods and services, right? So when you register a trademark, it gives you the exclusive right to use that mark in association with specific goods or services. The protection can last as long as the mark is distinctive. Okay, so when you file a trademark application, when you're granted a trademark, it's renewable, right? Every 10 years, you can renew the trademark if you continue to use the trademark and if the mark remains distinctive. One example of a mark that is it at risk of losing its trademark protection is Kleenex, right? Kleenex is becoming a generic term for facial tissues, right? If you pull a facial tissue out of a box, you say, do you have a Kleenex, right? But the word Kleenex itself is really meant to be a distinctive word to connect the brand Kleenex to specific facial tissues. But that distinctiveness is going away. So you'll see Kleenex now in brand campaigns is referring to facial tissues as Kleenex facial tissues. They want those facial tissues to be the generic term and Kleenex to be a distinctive modifier of facial tissues. Okay, so you need to maintain that distinctiveness or you're at risk of losing your trademark protection. Common law trademarks, so I mentioned earlier, trademark protection can be registered, but it doesn't have to be registered. If you see the R with a circle mark around it, that's a registered trademark. If you see a TM with a circle around it, that's an unregistered mark. Sometimes we put that on goods where the mark application has been filed, but it hasn't been granted yet. Other times, if a company has not even filed an application, you can mark the product name, for example, or a logo on a product with a TM to indicate to consumers that you're asserting trademark rights in that mark. Next, we have risks that are associated with IP that are important for small and medium-sized enterprises to understand and be aware of at an early stage. The first one I'll talk about is freedom to operate. Okay, and this is an often misunderstood concept, I'll say. Freedom to operate, here's an example of two cups. Okay, if we look at the ceramic cup on the left-hand side, that can be what we'll call invention number one. It's a ceramic cup and it's been patented. Invention number two comes along and Chris has developed a new cup and it's got a handle on it, right? When we talk about patentability, we ask the question, can Chris patent his number two invention of a cup with a handle? And to do that, we look at prior art, which is Eva's cup of being a ceramic cup. So that's a question of patentability. Can you get a patent for this new cup in view of the prior art? Freedom to operate is different from patentability. Freedom to operate is, can Chris commercialize his invention of a cup with a handle? Okay, and to do that, we need to look at the patents that have already been granted and see if Chris's cup would infringe any of those patents. Okay, so that could include if Chris's cup is ceramic and Eva has a patent on a ceramic cup, it doesn't matter if Chris adds a handle to his. He may be able to get a patent on a cup with a handle, but he may also infringe Eva's cup if it's made of a ceramic material. Okay, so I hope that helps with that understanding. Freedom to operate can be an important consideration at early stages of companies to so they can receive comfort that if they go to market with a product, they're not going to be infringing somebody else's. Inventorship and ownership is important. An inventor is someone who makes a material contribution to an invention. Okay, they're either involved with the conception of the invention or they're involved with putting the conceived idea into practice. Inventorship is non-transferable. It's a legal requirement when filing a patent application. You must list who the inventors are of the invention. Inventorship is different than ownership. At a default rule, the first inventors are the first owners of a patent application, but ownership is transferable. So if their inventors are employees of the company and their job is to invent for that company, then they have an obligation to assign their rights as inventors to their company. If the inventors are a consultant and they've invented something, but it's not really related to what they've been doing and it's kind of related, then you want to understand if they have an obligation to assign their rights or what complexities there may be in your company acquiring ownership of something that they have invented. So it's just an important point to note for startups and scaling companies. Employee misappropriation of IP, another risk for startup companies. You need to ensure legal precautions are in place to address risk associated with employees who leave to go to a competitor or to start their own competing venture. Okay, it's important to have strong employment agreements in place when hiring employees that have strong confidentiality provisions and have IP clauses to ensure that their employees are assigning rights as inventors to the business. Okay. And you may even want to consider having a robust but reasonable non-compete and non-solicitation clauses. There's a lot of litigation around whether or not non-compete and non-solicitation clauses are enforceable, particularly under Canadian law. The very brief answer is they are, but they may need to be reasonable. Okay, so that's another risk to be aware of. How employees of other companies pose risk. So beware of hiring new employees and be aware of any confidentiality agreements that they may have in place with past employers. When you're hiring new employees or third parties, make sure you have a good policy when dealing with confidential information that they may have and that you may have access to. Okay. I think development, it's important to understand, I hinted at this earlier, but any co-ownership issues with joint development and what rights exist for co-owners of patents. So you need to enter into agreements beforehand, be proactive about what IP rights contributors have invented before the joint development and who's going to own any IP that exists as a result or is created as a result of the joint development. Okay, joint development with third parties can be useful to speed up development, but you need to sort out IP ownership and IP rights before starting the work so that everybody is clear as to where ownership will lie in the work that's created out of the development. There's a couple of examples here. If there's one co-owner solely by its own efforts is able to license the IP and generate a revenue stream, to what extent is the other entitled to benefit from this revenue? So these are considerations for negotiating who's going to own IP, who's going to have rights to use IP, who's going to have say in any IP transactions, who's going to take action against potential infringers of co-owned IP. These are types of issues that you should be aware of. Again, typically we contract out of these beforehand, to contract these situations in order to protect companies before issues arise. That's generally the takeaway. The last point we have is talking a little bit about effective IP strategies particularly for startup food and agricultural businesses. Okay, so I hinted about this earlier, but IP protection is really critical for food and agri-tech businesses for a couple of different reasons. But I think the most important reason is that IP can create this barrier to entry, right? Food and agri-tech businesses often require a lot of research and development investment. And in order to put this barrier to entry into the space that your business is investing all of this money into research and development, we need to use IP to kind of protect that. Using that and bouncing off of it a little bit, by protecting that research and development investment, you can increase the valuation of the startup, right? The most valuable assets of startups in the food and agri-tech sectors is their IP, and so we need to protect that. So how can we do that? Well, we need to develop good IP generation and protection strategies, okay? So you need to capture inventions early by either conducting internal IP audits or having simple disclosure processes, right? We need to use patent filings strategically. We need to think about where markets are going to be most important, both for your business and what markets are your competitors in. Those are the markets where you're going to want to have patent protection so that you can both protect your own business and potentially stop competitors from being able to practice in different markets if they are practicing in different markets. You need to secure ownership through signed assignments, both from founders and employees and contractors. And you need to establish basic trademark and branding strategies early to avoid rebranding. This can include doing searches to make sure you're going to be able to use your own trademarks that you've developed and to build your branding strategy over time. So I've got a couple of different examples of food and agri-tech businesses that have used patents and trademarks primarily in different ways to protect different aspects of the business. The first example here is the Oreo cookie. So this one's a little bit older, but still relatable. I've got a picture here of a US patent, granted patent back in 1987, and it's for the composition of the filler cream in an Oreo cookie. So in this case, Nabisco sought to patent their filler composition for their cookie because they felt that if they maintained it as a trade secret, they're probably going to face competition anyway. People were probably going to copy what they were doing, and they thought they could get a greater amount of protection out of filing a patent application than they would if they just maintained it as a trade secret. So I've included a couple of the claims here. You can see that the composition itself is protected, or the filler cream is protected, and there are some requirements of the features of the filler cream, right? So it's 39% solid at 50 degrees Celsius, 17% solid at 70 degrees, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, excuse me, 17% solid at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and it goes on and on and on. So it's easy from reading this to understand, oh, it's the aspect that the filler cream melts very quickly once somebody eats the cookie that they're protecting. Okay, and you can go through that and take a look, and that melting is the feature of that is expressed through temperature and through the specific gravity of the filler cream itself. So that's one example. There are others. Or Nabisco filed, I think there's 5, maybe even 6 original patent applications on the Oreo cookie for different features and for different aspects, primarily of the filler cream, which is interesting. Agri-tech sector, Roundup Ready patents, Roundup Ready crops are patentable and have been patentable for a long period of time. Here, this is a patent that's been granted in the United States for Roundup Ready canola oil, or Roundup Ready canola, excuse me, that's been filed by Monsanto. So here you can see that the patent is there's many different claims, but the first claim is a recombinant DNA molecule with a polynucleotide molecule having specific sequences. These sequences are disclosed within the patent application. And then if you read down at claim 17, there's a method for controlling weeds in a field comprising plants, comprising eventmon 88302. That's what they call the sequence of the canola that prevents the canola from being killed by Roundup when the field is sprayed with Roundup. So here Monsanto has developed this technology and has filed patents in many jurisdictions. This is the US patent, but they also file in Canada, many other jurisdictions to protect that research and development. And patents, we didn't really talk about plant patents, but this is an example of a plant patent. A plant patent is grants protection to inventors who have discovered or asexually reproduced a new and distinct plant variety. So in this case, the plant variety is the Honeycrisp apple. So it's developed in the late 1980s. A plant patent was granted in 1990, and it allowed the inventors, in this case, the patent owner was the University of Minnesota, to stop others from reproducing plants of the type that was protected, in this case, Honeycrisp apples, which is interesting. So if you have a new type of plant, you can protect that through what's called a plant patent. Just moving along quick, John Deere done a brilliant job, frankly, in protecting its trademarks and its branding. Here, there's three examples. I mentioned earlier, and you may not have picked up, but trademarks are actually a type of mark that is protectable by trademark is color, which is interesting. It's not easy to get, but you can obtain a trademark on the color of a product if you can show distinctiveness of that color. So here, there's three examples of different tractors and lawn tractors that have that distinctive John Deere green color in combination with yellow features. And that's what they're protecting, this combination. So if you have a green tractor with yellow wheels, as you see on the left, that's one example of a color combination that's been trademarked. Okay. A green tractor with a yellow stripe across the body is another combination that's been trademarked. A green lawn tractor in this case with a yellow seat is another combination that's been trademarked. So these can be very, very valuable, right? As you can imagine, John Deere is able to stop others from making, using, or selling tractors or lawn tractors that use the color green in association with a combination of green on the body of the tractor with a yellow seat. Like that's a massively powerful registration that doesn't expire, right? As long as John Deere itself continues to use that mark. And it's an example of a extremely powerful way to use trademark registration. I talked earlier about IP risk management and the idea of food tech and agri-tech companies. You should maintain awareness of competitor patents and emerging filings. So you should search the patent databases every once in a while to see what your competitors have been filing. You need to have strong confidentiality and access control processes to prevent leakage of your trade secrets. These are strategies to minimize the risk of issues that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And here's some tips, some final tips on getting your IP ready if you're seeking investment, right? You need to know what your IP is. You need to conduct an audit, understand what IP you own. If you are licensing IP, what that is, what rights you have when you are licensing IP. Do you have new IP that you'd like to register? You haven't done it yet. There are strategic ways, like I mentioned some examples earlier about strategic ways, excuse me, to use different types of IP to protect different aspects of your business. I think that's really the takeaway. We can do strategy work beforehand and be proactive with IP strategies in order to get the best value, the most value for your business. Very last point I'll make, and the next slide is my last slide, is about some IP funding opportunities. If anybody is not aware of these, I highly recommend you look into them. There's 3 programs right now that provide government funding to small businesses for intellectual property. There's IP Assist by our IRAP. It's a federal program. There's Elevate IP, another federal program that is we expect to kind of ramp up again in April. And there's IPON, Intellectual Property Ontario, that is a provincial program. All of these can be used. They can be used to provide different benefits to your company. You can potentially use all 3 at the same time, and there's real value that can be obtained for things like filing patent applications, filing trademark applications, and doing the strategy work that I've been talking about so far today. That is all for me. Sure, Christina, if there's any questions, if there are, I'm happy to take any. I think we have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, we have a ton of questions.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to acknowledge that some folks will only be available to stay on until 1 p.m.
Okay.
And so with that, I'm going to encourage you to book time for those of us who are joining us live in person or online, to book time with your TechAlliance advisor, particularly to review each of the 3 sources of funding that David has just shared. We have opportunities to make those referrals at the right time in your IP journey. So Jess is going to drop that link into the chat so that you've got that to book with your advisor. And from there, I'm going to have a look at the questions. And for those that need to drop off, drop off if you need to, but we've got probably 3 or 4 good questions in here.
Sure.
I'll start with the first one that came in. David, it's from Karen, and she wanted to know whether or not you can trademark a marketing slogan, or if you should trademark a marketing slogan.
Yes, you absolutely can trademark a marketing slogan. If you think of, for example, just popped into my head, Nike's "Just Do It" slogan is absolutely trademarkable. You can register that trademark in association with your goods and services that you're offering as your company. So you can certainly do that. It's definitely recommended. I'll mention and again and highlight, you can also use the slogan before you register to try and build some goodwill. And then you can have a better understanding of maybe if it's worth registering afterwards, if it's something that you think your customers appreciate.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. There was you mentioned that trade secrets need to be labeled as such when communicating with employees and outside contacts. So do NDAs and employment agreements suffice as a blanket, or does each instance need to be flagged separately? Great question by Conrad. And I think this is a question we often see, particularly with early stage companies.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I'll say this. Non-disclosure agreements are great. Obviously, please attempt. Sometimes third parties are not keen to sign non-disclosure agreements, but please have non-disclosure agreements. Try and use non-disclosure agreements whenever you can. But trade secret protection is all about layering protection, right? NDA is one layer. Marking information that you're presenting, for example, as confidential, lets the third party that you're sharing it with know that it's confidential information. Letting your companies know that it's confidential is another layer. That's an internal layer as opposed to an external layer. But you want to take all of these steps in order to ensure that whoever you're giving that information to understands that it's confidential, and they understand that they're not to disclose it to a third party, right? NDAs are great, but sometimes they can be difficult to enforce. And you need to build a trust really with the person that you're disclosing it with, and feel comfortable that they understand that they're not to disclose it to another third party, at least without telling you beforehand, preferably not at all.
Okay, thank you. There is a question, really specific question by Tracy. If you have a recipe for a beverage that folks are really familiar with, but your ingredient ratios and preparation methods are specific, can you patent those?
That's a great question. the answer is yes, you can patent recipes, no question. Um, if you've been selling the goods that are subject to the recipe that is being made, then generally that's considered a disclosure or at least an offer to sale of the invention. So there are time limits that you need to be aware of. There are some countries where you could no longer file a patent application. There are some countries where you could. The ones that you can are generally Canada and the US, right? We have 1 year after a disclosure event or in this case, an offer for sale to file a patent application. But you can patent recipes, no question. Yeah.
Okay. Similar, but a little bit different. The question is coming from someone who's looking at trade dress for their pet treat brand. They use an animal shaped window, which is unique in the industry. Can they file the different proteins that they work with in one filing?
So I'll say this, you could file what I'll call a utility patent application that could disclose the shapes that you mentioned. You could also disclose the different proteins that you're using. The rule is in patents, you only get one patent per invention. Okay, and those would be different inventions. If you wanted to pursue, let's say, a protection for the trade dress, which I'll call like the design or the look, right? And if you want to pursue the different proteins and the recipe that they're or the inclusion of them at least in the product, that would be a separate invention. So you could start with one filing with the expectation that you're going to have to split them into separate applications down the road. Okay, that's kind of a general answer. If they want a little bit more details, they can reach out to me and I can give them a little bit more, maybe of a complete answer about how that could work. But generally, that's I think the response. Yeah.
And maybe an add-on to that, if there are recipes with different novel proteins, like combinations, say the company uses 3 novel proteins, but they have a combination of them, would each of those then be a separate patent?
Generally not. Generally, what you would want is to try and pursue claims to the combination of the novel proteins in the product that are broad enough to protect all different ranges that may be of value, right? So you would want to you would try to get as broad a scope of protection that would cover, excuse me, all of the different combinations. So the goal there would be that just the combination of the 3 proteins in and of itself, without considering the different ratios that they may be in, would be patentable as a broad aspect.
Okay, and then with regards to a trademark, would that be would there be any different response by you if the focus was on a trademark?
So if you wanted trademark protection, you could potentially protect the look of the product itself through trademark, right? And it would be, how does it look in association with the goods and services of the product? So that would be a different search, right? You would need to search, and you may come up with I was going to say prior art, but there may be other trademark registrations to different products that could be considered confusingly similar, and it would only be focused on kind of the aesthetic features of the product itself.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay, and I think it's the burning question that
Hmm.
particularly early stage startups consider. And a barrier to entry is sometimes the cost. And so one of the things that you featured in your presentation that we often talk about when we're advising our TechAlliance member companies is being focused on what that cost might be in order to have that protective moat with the generation of novel patented products.
Yeah.
Are you able to give sort of just an overall what a cost would be, the average cost of both trademark and trade secret process just for in Canada? And how much different is that to have the same for the US or other international markets?
Yeah, so that we can talk about that. This is the struggle for every startup company in every technology space anywhere, right? How do I, and I'll use patents at first because that's where my practice lies mostly, right? How do I get the money to file the patent application without telling anybody about my product? Like I can't market it, I can't try to sell it, and how am I supposed to pay for it, right? So the struggle is everywhere. So I'll put out some numbers that I think are good kind of budget items, and I'll talk a little bit about the process for each of the different types of IP. So in a patent, generally what we do first is we file something called a US provisional patent application. We do that for many reasons, but one is flexibility and two is cost, right? So patents are awarded to those that file first. That gives us the ability to get a stake in the ground of what you invented and when it was first invented. Then you can decide, you have about a year to decide how many countries to pursue protection in and how seriously you want to pursue protection of the invention. Generally speaking, I would say the range of costs for drafting and filing that document at the US Patent Office is at the low end, $5,000 to $8,000. At the high end, $15,000 is not unreasonable. Kind of depends on the complexity of the invention, the complexity of the technology, and how much the inventors are able to contribute to preparing and filing the patent application. We need to consider drawings and what drawings we can include, and we need to write a document. I will encourage people to take a look at Google Patents. It's a great website to search patents in all jurisdictions from around the world, not all, but many jurisdictions from around the world, and see what they look like, how detailed they are, and get a good understanding of what's needed to draft and file a patent application. Once that's done, then you need to choose individual countries within a year's time. If you were to choose Canada, for example, it's about $2,500 to file a Canadian patent application. To file a regular application in the US is a little bit more, maybe $4,000. And the world's your oyster. If you want to file in Asia, we need to translate the application, so the costs go up. In Europe, you file very broadly at the beginning, so the costs are very high, frankly, at the beginning. It could be $10,000 to $12,000 just to file it, so the cost can increase. Generally for trademarks, we do a search beforehand to get an understanding of what the registrability is of the trademark. The trademark search, Canada and or the US, it's a couple $1,000s. To file a trademark application in Canada or the US is kind of the same, $2,000 to $3,000 generally to file the application. In all of these, in patents and trademarks, once an application is filed, that's not the end of the line, right? The costs go on throughout the lifetime of the patent or the trademark. To get it granted, there may be some back and forth with the trademarks examiner, so there could be some costs to get the trademark registered. In the patent world, there's most certainly going to be negotiation with a patent examiner in one or more countries, depending on how many countries you file in. So over the 2 or 3 years after you file a patent application, there are ongoing costs for negotiating with different patent offices. And then there's maintenance fees. So maintenance fees are fees that you pay to the patent offices to keep the patent on the register. Different countries have different rules. Canada, you have to pay every year. The US, you pay after it's been granted. So there are kind of ongoing fees. If anybody has any other questions about fees, feel free to reach out. I can give you more specifics based on your business, your technology, but those are hopefully some good rough numbers for you.
That's awesome, David. I really appreciate one that you stayed longer with the group. Clearly, there's a ton of interest by food innovators and agri-tech businesses in the region to access your expertise. And I really do appreciate that you prepared this session particularly focused on that sector. I often hear that Southwestern Ontario is the breadbasket of Ontario and Canada. And so the increase volume and sort of that flywheel impact of this sector of technology continues to grow with an awful lot of abundance, and really appreciate you actually dialing in more on specific examples that are recognizable and its application to folks who are building companies, made in Ontario companies. Again, if David's got contact information, share it as well. We have a direct line to David as a strong supporter to TechAlliance. And so if you'd like to have a direct introduction, we're happy to do that through your advisor. And for those of you who are still on the call with us, both virtually and in person, I encourage you to join us tonight for a tech meetup at Tilt Arcade, where you can chat with other innovators and folks who are building world-changing companies right here in Southwestern Ontario, and to join us for our next masterclass, which is focused on GEO. So focused on the change from SEO to GEO with the inclusion of AI in developing new habits for consumers who are searching for your company. And so with that, David, again, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, take good care until we see you next time.
Thanks, Christina.